I want you to imagine a scenario for a second. Just construct this environment in your mind while you're listening.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
So you are standing in a room, right? And occupying the space is every single person you hold dear. Your family, your closest confidants, the literal love of your life.
Right, everyone who matters.
Exactly. Now imagine that in order to save all of their lives, to pull the entire planet back from the brink of some just unspeakable cataclysmic disaster, you have to execute a single command.
Like pressing a button.
Yeah, you have to press a button. But the mechanism of this button, it doesn't just halt the disaster in its tracks. It demands a cosmic toll. It completely and irrevocably erases you from their memories.
Wow, just total erasure.
Total. I mean, think about every inside joke that took years to cultivate, every whispered secret in the middle of the night, every moment of just, profound wordless connection that defined who you are as a human being.
All of it just gone.
All of it. It is scrubbed from their neural pathways. When the dust settles, they will look at you, look right into your eyes, and they will perceive an absolute, utter stranger.
That's incredibly heavy.
Right. So the real question I want you to sit with today is this. How long could you sustain the physical reality of living with that secret?
Oh, man.
Like, how long could you walk past them on the avenue, witness them laughing, watch them forming new attachments and moving forward, and actually manage to keep your mouth shut?
It will be agonizing.
How long before the pressure in your chest just forces you to scream from the rooftops that you belong together?
I mean, it forces us to confront a staggering psychological premise. What you were describing is a state of perpetual living grief.
Yes. Living grief, that's exactly what it is.
Because the human brain is wired to mourn the loss of a loved one who has passed away or, left. But this scenario, it demands that you mourn the loss of your own existence within the minds of the living.
You're functionally a ghost.
Exactly. You are a ghost hunting people who are completely unaware of your presence. The cognitive dissonance required to maintain that facade, knowing the profound depth of what was lost while the other person just experiences a blank slate, I mean, that is a recipe for psychological rupture.
Welcome to the deep dive, by the way.
Yeah.
Because that agonizing thought experiment, that is the foundational bedrock of the narrative we are unpacking for you today.
It really is.
We've acquired the transcript for the final trailer of the highly anticipated film, Spider-Man: Brand New Day, Peter's Journey.
And it is not what people are expecting.
Not at all. So our primary objective for this deep dive is to synthesize the dialogue, the audio cues, and the implied pacing of this footage to answer one very specific question for you. Based purely on these clues, what should you actually expect when you sit down in that theater?
Right, because the marketing is definitely painting a very specific picture.
Yeah, and I can guarantee, just based on reading through this material, this is a radical departure from the breezy, pop music-infused superhero montages we've been, conditioned to consume.
Oh, absolutely. The tonal divergence is immediately striking. Just analyzing the cadence of the dialogue, the deliberate deployment of silence, and the oppressive audio landscape detailed in this transcript.
It's dark.
It's incredibly dark. We are looking at an atmosphere steeped in profound isolation. The baseline emotion here isn't triumph, it's a deep, creeping paranoia anchored by a truly tragic romance.
Yeah, the romance is really at the center of the tragedy here.
It is. The narrative architecture seems entirely focused on the corrosive psychological toll of heroism.
Yeah.
It's treating the superpowered spectacle as a secondary, almost burdensome element.
Right, the spectacle is almost a distraction from the tragedy. Let's delve into the opening sequence of the trailer because it aggressively establishes this new, brutal status quo.
It doesn't waste any time.
No, it really doesn't. We are presented with a flashback, or perhaps it's an internal reflection, where Peter is articulating the parameters of a past relationship. He states, "We used to know each other. We were together. But something bad was going to happen."
And to stop it, he had to make a choice.
Exactly. And to avert this unspecified disaster, he had to execute what he refers to as the hard thing. He tells this person, "You're going to forget who I am."
Notice the semantic weight of that phrase, the hard thing.
Yeah, it's very specific.
It is. Within the established lexicon of this specific genre, the hard thing is almost universally a physical sacrifice, right?
Like taking a bullet or something.
Exactly. It involves absorbing a catastrophic blow, physically restraining a collapsing structure, or engaging an adversary knowing the odds of survival are basically zero.
But here, it's completely different.
It is inverted. The sacrifice is entirely emotional. It's an act of deliberate self-erasure. He isn't giving his life, he is surrendering his identity in the eyes of the people who anchor his humanity.
It's the ultimate act of self-sabotage weaponized for the greater good. And the emotional crescendo of this sequence is the reaction of his loved one before the erasure takes permanent effect.
That part of the transcript is just gut-wrenching.
It really is. The notes mention a palpable, desperate panic in her voice. She says, "What? What are you talking about? I'm going to come and find you, and I'll explain everything."
She's trying to fight it.
Yeah, and he declares his love. She begins to reciprocate, and then she begs him, "Just wait and tell me when you see me again."
That specific piece of dialogue highlights a fundamental human defense mechanism, I think.
How so?
Well, confronted with the incomprehensible existential threat of having her own reality rewritten, she attempts to impose logic on the chaos. I'll explain everything. She is frantically trying to engineer a failsafe against cognitive erasure.
Right, like she knows she's losing her mind, so she's trying to back up the files.
Precisely. She realizes her mind is about to be wiped, so she assigns him the role of the external hard drive. She's pleading with him to be the sole archivist of their shared history, demanding that he hold on to the truth so he can reinstall it in her later.
Which makes the subsequent transition in the trailer feel incredibly violent, despite being visually mundane.
Oh, the cut to the coffee shop.
Yes. We are violently yanked from this high-stakes, emotionally shattering farewell directly into a sterile, everyday environment. We hear the distinct ring of a small bell, the kind you find on the door of an independent coffee shop.
It's so jarring.
It is. Peter approaches the counter and says, "Hi, my name is Peter Parker." But the transcript specifically highlights a painful, lingering hesitation before he completes the thought.
That pause is everything.
It really is. He pauses and then finishes with, "And I would like a coffee." And the barista simply replies, "Is there anything else?"
Ouch.
I know. It's the equivalent of standing mere inches from your soulmate, possessing the key to an entire universe of shared love and choosing to simply swallow it whole.
That juxtaposition is the thesis statement of his current mental state. You have the towering internal conflict slamming headfirst into an utterly indifferent external reality.
Yeah, the world just keeps turning.
It does. Historically, narratives in this space thrive on externalizing conflict. Alien invasions, cities plummeting from the sky. The conflict is highly visible.
Right, big CGI explosions.
Exactly. This trailer, however, deliberately grounds the narrative in an invisible, agonizing psychological trench. That hesitation in the transcript, that pause before ordering the coffee, represents the monumental exertion required to suppress a lifetime of intimacy just to participate in a meaningless transactional exchange.
Is there anything else? I find that line so remarkably callous in its innocence.
It really highlights the divide between them now.
Yeah, because from her perspective, it's just basic customer service. From his perspective, it's a direct invitation to shatter the facade. He could say, "Yes, actually, there is a sprawling, multidimensional tapestry of affection and trauma that we navigated together, and you literally beg me to remind you of it."
But he doesn't.
But the parameters of his sacrifice forbid it.
Yeah.
He just takes the coffee. It's a masterclass in quiet devastation.
It really is a self-imposed purgatory. And this leads us to a critical piece of voiceover that seems to recontextualize the entire philosophy of the character.
Right, the journal entry.
Yeah. We hear Peter narrating what sounds like an entry in a journal, or perhaps a letter he knows he cannot send. He muses, "Maybe I'll never read this to you. No, maybe I'm just writing this for me. And maybe that's my responsibility to live alone with the truth. Because I'm not just Peter Parker, I'm Spider-Man."
Framed against the established lore, living alone with the truth is a massive philosophical pivot.
It completely redefines his mantra.
It really does. We're dealing with an audience that knows the foundational tenet of this character involves the direct correlation between power and responsibility. Traditionally, that has dictated a mandate for action intervening in crises, utilizing unique abilities to enact tangible change.
Throwing punches, stopping muggers.
Right. Active physical heroism. But this internal monologue suggests a radical evolution of that mandate. He is redefining responsibility as a passive, invisible burden.
He's making suffering his primary job.
Yeah, he is actively framing his own social and emotional isolation as a heroic duty. The act of keeping the secret has become a heavier lift than stopping a speeding train.
Consider the psychological friction that creates, though. The responsibility is no longer just about what he does when he puts on the mask. It is about what he must endure when he takes it off.
Which is arguably much harder.
Definitely.
Yeah.
By internalizing this isolation as a necessary component of his heroism, he is placing himself in a uniquely vulnerable position. A human being devoid of a shared reality, fundamentally untethered from the social fabric that validates our existence, is incredibly fragile.
He is a glass house waiting for a stone.
Exactly. He is already standing on the precipice of a psychological breakdown before the main plot even initiates.
And I think that vulnerability is exactly what makes the introduction of the central conflict so insidious. Navigating this self-imposed exile is taxing enough when the stakes are just buying a cup of coffee.
Yeah.
But the trailer immediately pivots to introduce a threat designed specifically to exploit that exact fragility.
The transition from the internal sorrow of the barista interaction into a deeply unsettling external mystery is, it's very sharp.
Very sharp. The narrative gears shift dramatically from a character study in grief to a high-tension active investigation. The architecture of the conflict changes entirely.
So what are we looking at with this new threat?
Well, we are introduced to an ominous voiceover that delivers a chilling warning. It says, "We're faced with a threat that can be anyone."
You can be anyone.
Yes, and this is immediately followed by an interaction that completely scrambles the established rules of engagement for this universe. Peter's confronting someone, and he says, "You sure you want to do this, Scorpion?"
And the response is so eerie.
It is. The entity wearing that face simply tilts its head and replies, "You think I'm Scorpion?"
The editorial decision to place those two moments back to back is designed to destabilize the viewer in the exact same way the protagonist is being destabilized.
Yeah, and I actually want to pause and push back on the trailer's framing here because from a purely analytical standpoint, this presents a massive problem for the audience.
How do you mean?
If the explicit premise is that the threat can be anyone, and the very first example we see is a known villain revealing themselves to be a deceptive facade, why should we trust a single frame of this footage?
Ah, I see where you're going.
Right. We know how marketing works. Trailers are engineered to misdirect. But this feels like a structural warning. It implies that half the character interactions teased in this transcript might actually be Peter speaking to this imposter. The movie could be pulling a massive feature-length deception on the audience.
It's a fair point, but I would argue that your suspicion is not a flaw in the marketing, but the intended emotional byproduct of the premise.
Do you think they want us to be paranoid?
Oh, absolutely. By introducing an antagonist defined by deception and mimicry, the filmmakers are aggressively pivoting the genre. We are moving away from the kinetic, punch-heavy action film and directly into the territory of a paranoid thriller.
A superhero narrative retrofitted into a paranoid thriller framework. That's fascinating.
Right. The stakes transition from raw physical dominance to a battle of perception and deduction. It ceases to be a straightforward question of overpowering the enemy.
It becomes an intricate, high-stakes game of whodunit.
Exactly. A whodunit where the perpetrator possesses the terrifying ability to wear the face of a trusted ally, an anonymous bystander, or a legacy adversary.
Let's look at the specific tactical choice of impersonating Scorpion for a second. If an entity possesses the ability to assume any form, why choose the visage of a known combatant? Why not blend into the background architecture or assume the form of a non-threatening civilian?
It's deliberate psychological warfare.
Yes. By deliberately selecting the appearance of an established foe, the antagonist is weaponizing Peter's history against him. They are hijacking his cognitive expectations to maximize disorientation.
It's a localized form of gaslighting.
Totally. Think about the muscle memory involved here. If Peter sees Scorpion, a very specific neurological sequence initiates. He knows the weight of that tail, he understands the striking distance, he anticipates a very specific rhythm of physical combat.
His body prepares to fight Scorpion.
Right, and then the entity simply negates that reality. You think I'm Scorpion. It completely invalidates Peter's tactical preparation.
It renders his past experience not just useless, but an active liability. And this circles back to the psychological baseline we established earlier.
The isolation.
Yes, Peter is already a man who has forcibly erased his own personal history to protect the world. His grip on a shared reality is already tenuous. Introducing an enemy that manipulates sensory input, an adversary that makes it fundamentally impossible to trust one's own eyes, is a masterstroke of antagonistic design.
It's the perfect lock for where his psyche is currently keyed.
Exactly. It's exploiting his specific current weakness.
It's like asking someone who just suffered a severe concussion to navigate a funhouse mirror maze while people throw rocks at them. The cruelty is the point.
That's a very vivid analogy, but it's accurate.
And I think we need to scrutinize the specific phrasing used in the voiceover. It states, this is a threat that can be anyone. It doesn't say a threat that can look like anyone or create the illusion of anyone. Can be anyone.
That implies a level of infiltration that goes beyond simple holograms or visual trickery.
It suggests a terrifying completeness to the deception.
The distinction is vital. In the architecture of a paranoid thriller, the most paralyzing fear doesn't stem from the monster hiding in the shadows. It stems from the monster sitting across from you at the dinner table, perfectly mimicking the mannerisms of someone you trust.
Yeah, that is infinitely scarier.
The terror is rooted in the steady erosion of certainty. If the barista handing you a coffee might be an assassin, if the villain you are trading blows with is just a puppet, the boundaries of your world shrink rapidly. The environment becomes uniformly hostile.
Which poses a massive mechanical question for the narrative. How do you physically combat a threat when your primary sensory inputs are compromised?
You can't just swing around punching everyone.
Right, you can't just swing through the city throwing punches at anyone who gives you a weird look. You need a mechanism to pierce the illusion. The trailer transitions from establishing this impossible problem to revealing the methodology required to solve it, and it hinges entirely on a very specific, often underutilized asset.
They're taking a legacy element of the character's power set and elevating it.
Yes, from a passive reflex to the central investigative engine of the plot.
We hear an unidentified ally delivering critical exposition to Peter. They say, "You're the only one who can sense it. You're the only one who can defeat it."
And Peter responds with this exhausted, incredibly human plea. He just says, hey, can we do this one at a time, please?
This exchange redefines the utility of the spider sense. In the broader lexicon of the character's history, this ability has functioned almost exclusively as a localized early warning system.
Like a biological tripwire.
Exactly. It alerts him to dodge incoming fire, avoid a blindside attack, or sense an immediate ambush. It triggers, he reacts, the threat is neutralized, and the sense goes dormant.
It's a purely kinetic reflex. But this dialogue indicates a profound evolution of that mechanic. It is no longer just a buzzer that tells him to duck. It is being positioned as the sole tether to objective reality in a world drowning in deception.
If his optical and auditory nerves can be hacked by this imposter, his extrasensory perception becomes his only reliable diagnostic tool.
He essentially has to operate as a human polygraph, traversing a city of potential liars.
However, the voiceover explicitly isolates him in this capability. You're the only one who can sense it.
The only one.
Right. This implies a broader context where conventional intelligence apparatuses, and perhaps other enhanced individuals, are failing to detect the infiltration because they lack this specific biological anomaly.
Which perfectly contextualizes the inclusion of a wildly chaotic variable in this trailer. The footage teases an encounter, an interaction with the Hulk.
This scene is fascinating to me.
We hear Peter desperately seeking intellectual backup. He asks Dr. Banner, and the response he receives is a guttural, furious dismissal. No Banner, only Hulk.
Just raw anger.
Yeah, and I want to unpack the utility of this encounter for a second. In a narrative defined by a sneaky, deceptive, shape-shifting threat, is the presence of an entity entirely defined by uncontrollable rage actually a benefit?
Yeah.
From a tactical perspective, it seems extremely counterproductive.
It is entirely counterproductive, and I believe that is the thematic purpose of the scene. Consider what Peter is actually asking for when he says, Dr. Banner.
He's looking for the scientist.
Exactly. He is faced with a complex, reality-bending puzzle. He is actively seeking a peer, a brilliant scientist, a theoretical physicist, a mind capable of analyzing the mechanics of deception. He needs a collaborator to help him process the impossible parameters of the threat.
He's looking for someone who can help him build a metaphorical magnifying glass, and instead he's handed a live grenade.
Precisely. The absence of Bruce Banner's intellect and the dominance of the Hulk's pure, unadulterated brute force highlights the sheer uselessness of physical power against this specific enemy.
You cannot punch paranoia.
You cannot smash a deception. Against a threat you cannot accurately identify, an unstoppable force of nature is not an asset, it is a highly volatile liability that could inadvertently cause catastrophic collateral damage while swinging blindly at shadows.
It just really underlines his intellectual isolation. He has all this physical backup available, but mentally he is entirely alone on the island. The exhaustion in his voice when he asks to do this one at a time is a massive indicator of the pacing we should expect.
But the protagonist is not going to be in control.
Not at all. He's going to be relentlessly, systematically overwhelmed.
He is attempting to manage compounding vectors of stress. He has the physical unpredictability of a raging Hulk demanding immediate containment. He has the psychological torture of an imposter who could assume the form of anyone in his vicinity.
And on top of all that,
Layered over all of this is the sheer neurological exhaustion of being the sole individual capable of detecting the danger.
think about the physical toll that takes on a human nervous system. If the spider sense is constantly pinging every time he enters a crowded subway car or walks through a busy intersection because the imposter might be near, his brain must be screaming at him incessantly.
The adrenaline fatigue alone would be debilitating.
It creates an environment where his stated desire to live alone with the truth becomes fundamentally impossible to maintain safely.
Right, because he wishes to retreat, to construct a fortress of isolation to protect the people he loves from the fallout of his existence. But the mechanics of this new threat demand constant, vigilant engagement with the world.
He cannot disengage, because disengaging means leaving the world blind to the infiltration.
And the tragic irony is that he isn't just forced to engage with anonymous crowds. The crisis inevitably forces him to cross paths with the specific individuals he sacrificed his own identity to protect.
That's where it really hurts.
The trailer uses its final act to weave all these disparate threads, the amnesia, the paranoia, the physical exhaustion, into a series of incredibly tense, ironic interpersonal collisions.
This is where the theoretical stakes of the premise manifest as visceral, emotional consequences. The external threat serves as the pressure cooker, forcing Peter to navigate the shattered remnants of his past relationships under the worst possible conditions.
Let's dissect how this memory wipe completely destabilizes his interactions with his former inner circle, specifically Ned and MJ.
The trailer explicitly contrasts the dynamic before and after the erasure. Right?
Yes. We hear a clip from the past where Ned discovers Peter's alter ego. It's a hushed, intense, conspiratorial whisper. You're the Spider-Man. You can't tell anybody about this. You got to keep it a secret.
And Peter validates that trust. It represents a shared burden.
It establishes a baseline of absolute transparency between them. Ned is an anchor point, a confidant who understands the dual nature of Peter's existence and the immense danger it entails. He's an active participant in managing the risk.
But the narrative aggressively severs that anchor point. We cut to the present, in the post-wipe reality. Ned, who ostensibly views Peter as just some guy in his orbit, is staring at a device right next to him.
He has no idea who he's sitting next to.
None. He announces the Spidey Tracker app says that Spider-Man is in the direct vicinity. Peter, trapped in his own lie, is forced to feign ignorance to his own best friend. He awkwardly deflects with, "Oh yeah, no way, that's crazy."
On a surface level, the edit provides necessary comedic relief. The dramatic irony of the situation is inherently humorous. The audience possesses knowledge that the characters lack, creating a mild absurdity.
The delivery's fantastic, yeah.
Yeah.
But when you look past the humor, the implications are horrifying.
How so?
Well, Peter wiped Ned's memory specifically to remove him from the board, to ensure he wouldn't be targeted by villains seeking leverage. But by removing the context of the danger, he has inadvertently turned Ned into an active, oblivious participant.
Oh, I see what you mean.
Ned is literally using software to track a high-value target who is currently being hunted by a shape-shifting assassin.
Ignorance does not equal invulnerability. By erasing Ned's knowledge of the lethal realities of Peter's life, Peter has stripped Ned of his situational awareness. Ned no longer knows when to run, when to hide, or when a situation has escalated beyond civilian control. He is walking directly into a war zone because he thinks it's a game.
It's the ultimate tragic irony. The act designed to ensure safety becomes the primary catalyst for endangerment. And this irony reaches its absolute peak during the interaction with MJ shown in the trailer.
This scene feels like the emotional fulcrum of the entire film.
Without a doubt. Peter is in full panic mode, attempting to extract her from a crisis. He yells, "Whoa, I'm sorry, but you're in danger." She reacts with understandable bewilderment. And then Peter utters a line that, devoid of context, sounds completely deranged.
What does he say?
He pleads, "I promised you that I would keep you safe. Please, you just have to trust me."
It really forces an examination of the ethics of his actions. Peter is operating under the moral imperative of a promise made in a timeline that no longer exists for her.
Right.
He is attempting to enforce a contract that she has zero recollection of signing.
And I have to severely critique Peter's operational logic here. By insisting on maintaining this wall of amnesia during a life-or-death crisis, he is actively hindering her survival.
From her vantage point, a masked vigilante or a frantic stranger materializes out of nowhere, declares a unilateral obligation to her safety, and demands blind obedience.
Why on earth would you trust him?
Your critique strikes at the central tension of the film's premise. Peter's methodology is entirely compromised by his own trauma. He is clinging to the belief that the memory wipe was the correct choice, and to reverse it would invalidate the immense suffering he has endured to maintain it.
But practically speaking,
Practically speaking, from a purely tactical perspective, withholding critical information from a civilian caught in a fluid combat situation is disastrous.
exactly. If she retained the knowledge of their relationship, she would possess an innate understanding of the baseline risks. She would know the protocols for a sudden attack.
She wouldn't have to second-guess his motives.
Right. By rendering her a blank slate, he has reduced her to a bewildered bystander who has to constantly evaluate whether the person trying to save her might actually be the threat.
The transcript notes her response to his plea. After a beat, she offers a reluctant single-word acquiescence. She just says, "Fine."
Just fine.
The tonal delivery implied here is paramount. It is not an enthusiastic embrace of his protection. It is the raw, instinctual capitulation of a person who recognizes they are completely out of their depth and must choose the lesser of two perceived evils in a fraction of a second.
It's the fine of someone who realizes the chaotic stranger yelling at them probably possesses more data about the immediate threat than they do. But that reluctant trust is a terrifyingly fragile foundation to build a survival strategy on.
And that fragility will undoubtedly be the emotional crucible of the narrative. The climax of this film will likely not revolve around the physical defeat of the imposter.
No, I doubt it's going to end with a big punch.
The true narrative stakes lie in whether these characters, Ned and MJ, can instinctively bridge the gap created by the memory wipe. It asks if trust can exist as a somatic response, independent of cognitive memory.
Can they sense his inherent goodness, his desperation to protect them, even when their brains insist he is a stranger?
That concept elevates the material significantly. Can the soul retain a resonance that the mind has been forced to discard? It proposes that profound human connection might leave a residual fingerprint on our instincts, a subconscious tether that defies cognitive erasure.
But Peter is asking for a monumental leap of faith in an environment designed specifically to punish trust. He is asking her to trust a ghost, while simultaneously battling an enemy whose entire modus operandi is wearing the faces of trusted people to inflict harm.
It represents narrative autonomy operating at peak efficiency. The writers have successfully merged the external sci-fi threat with the internal emotional trauma, fashioning an inescapable psychological trap for the protagonist.
An inescapable trap.
He is isolated by his own noble sacrifice, hunted by a specter he cannot visually identify, and tasked with protecting individuals who view his every action with justifiable suspicion. It is an emotional and tactical gauntlet.
So as we synthesize all these elements, let's clearly define the parameters of what you should expect when you engage with Spider-Man. Brand new day.
It's a lot to take in.
It is. Basically, you should jettison the expectations of a standard triumphant superhero formula. The architecture of this narrative is that of a paranoid psychological endurance test. You are going to witness a protagonist stripped of his support system, navigating a reality where visual confirmation is meaningless, forced to rely exclusively on a sensory anomaly to detect an enemy that can infiltrate any space.
Prepare for a viewing experience heavily reliant on the tension of dramatic irony. The suspense will be generated just as much in quiet conversations as it is in kinetic set pieces.
You will observe Peter attempting to manage a landscape where incredible power, represented by an uncontrollable Hulk, provides zero intellectual utility.
Where his closest confidant is unwittingly turning him into prey via a smartphone application.
And where his desperate attempts to fulfill a promise of protection only underscore the agonizing reality that the woman he loves considers him an absolute stranger.
It is constructed to be an emotionally grueling experience.
Definitely. But before we conclude this deep dive, we want to present you with a final provocation. Something for you to turn over in your mind that extrapolates on the foundation we've just established.
We have thoroughly analyzed the premise that the antagonist is a threat that can be anyone, and we have established that Peter's sole defense mechanism is his extrasensory perception. He must rely on it completely.
Right.
But consider the psychological erosion we discussed at the very beginning of this analysis. What happens to the structural integrity of his mind if, during a moment of high stress, his senses begin to trigger in the presence of the people he is sacrificing everything to protect?
The implications of that are genuinely staggering.
What happens when he steps into a confined space with Ned, or attempts to pull MJ out of the line of fire, and the neurological alarm bells in his head begin to scream?
Oh, man.
If he is truly committed to the martyrdom of living alone with the truth, how much prolonged, extreme isolation is required before he begins to doubt the fidelity of his own sensory input?
If you are already lying to everyone around you about the nature of reality, it's really only a matter of time before you suspect reality is lying to you.
Precisely. How long before the demarcation line dissolves completely between who is genuinely a shape-shifting imposter and who is simply a tragic casualty of Peter's own escalating, unbearable paranoia?
Because if you cannot trust your eyes and your extrasensory perception begins targeting your allies, sanity basically becomes a mathematical impossibility.
It does.
And that circles us perfectly back to the scenario we asked you to construct at the beginning. If you successfully erased yourself from the collective memory of everyone you cherish, and you forced yourself to monitor them from the shadows, absorbing that grief daily, eventually, the agonizing isolation might begin to fracture your perception of reality.
Would you possess the self-awareness to realize when the paranoia had taken root?
Exactly. When the lights dim in the theater, ask yourself how long you could endure the silence before you began seeing threats in the faces of the people you love. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We'll be back next time with another investigation.